This is SaaS Therapy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of SaaS Therapy, the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. I am your host, Todd Kirk, and I'm joined by my ready to lift and move boxes compadre, Casey Trujillo. Tonight, Casey and I are doing a service project tonight, and he was asking about it yesterday, and I want you to know, Casey, it's going to be a lot of fun. But you might be sore at the end. So
fantastic. Yeah. I mean, let everybody know here out in Utah, we have the Silicon Slopes. It's a community of tech leadership, and they have this big conference. And for some reason, Brainstorm about 5 or 6 years ago picked up this challenge that every time during the conference we pack 1 million meals, and then they get delivered out to those that need it in the state of Utah and surrounding areas, from what I hear, something like that. Is that right, Todd?
That's right. And it is going to be a rager, just packing all that food. So we are joined today by Kelly McNamee, who is the Director of Customer Learning at Point Click Care. And we are super pumped to have Kelly on the show. Kelly, welcome to SaaS Therapy.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This is great. Yeah. And by the way, I love that's a focus for you. That's definitely close to my heart, is companies that balance, employees and customers and business and community. So I love that that's what you guys are doing tonight.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. Appreciate that. Now, Kelly, I was doing some studying this week, and I came across the word awful. And you hear that word, and immediately we think of it in a negative context, awful, like that wasn't great. But originally, the word awful comes from 2 words, awe, meaning inspired, like wow, and full. So the actual meaning of the word awful is full of wonder and awe. Well, you can't use awe because that's in the word, but you know what I mean. But in the 1800s, people started to change the word and put it into a negative context. So, Kelly, I'm saying this because today you're here to give us a framework. And I'm going to say the words Six Sigma is the framework we're going to go through. And I think for some people, they might have a positive connotation with it. They might have a negative connotation with it. So, Kelly, why is this a framework that you build customer education off of, and how this solves business? Because, when I first heard it back in the day, I thought it was something in Karate Kid. It was some belt that you won. I didn't know it was actually a wonderful framework in which people should be more aware of. So maybe, Kelly, start us from the beginning. What is it? What is it about? And why is this something that you feel passionate about, that it helps people come together and collaborate and find answers to problems?
Yeah, I think first of all, your connotation with Karate Kid, it's not that far off, because we do get physical belts. I do have a physical green belt somewhere in my office. Nice. So that's not so far off.
Is that why you're wearing green right now? If you get the belt, do you have to match your outfit accordingly?
Wow, that's actually that's a powerful statement, Todd. I like that. I wear it. I'm wearing it. No, I think the big thing that Six Sigma does, just at, what is it, kind of high level, is it helps organizations understand what's not working, why it's not working, and then how to fix it with data instead of purely gut instincts. And it started quite a while ago in manufacturing. And when you think about manufacturing, it makes sense, because that's where there's very much a repeatable process with lots of friction, right? There's lots of points along, a widget, like they use widgets a lot as an example. A widget goes through how many people, how many machines, how many processes. And so there's a lot of places where that widget could, could experience like defect, or where there could be what they refer to as like a non-value add step. Something a customer does not care if the widget is blue. You color the widget blue. You've now added 1 minute to that process. That's not a value add. And so that's why it started there. But Six Sigma applies to, especially for something like customer education and a customer experience, digital CS, scaled CS, because of the fact that we are also in the business of repeatable data-driven processes and experiences for our customers because of the scalable nature of what we're doing. And so, on a large scale, Six Sigma projects do involve, like on a large scale one, lots of statistics and like a myriad of tools. And but realistically, the core concepts are something that I would encourage anyone to incorporate into their design process and into their ongoing operations, all the way from prioritization planning all the way through to execution and being able to actually measure the success. And I think another thing sometimes you'll hear simultaneously with the term Six Sigma is lean or lean Six Sigma. So there's like two concepts, lean and Six Sigma. Six Sigma is more focused on those defects and variations in the process, and then Lean is more focused on eliminating waste or in improving the flow of, let's say, the work or of the experience. And so when you combine those two things together, that's really what I would say is like the most applicable flavor of Six Sigma for the work that we do, because those are all things that in customer education and scaled CS, we live in repeatable processes, right? Onboarding journeys, support, deflection, workflows, trigger-based communications, digital communications. And so really what Six Sigma does is it helps to answer those, hard questions of where are the customers getting stuck? Which moments most impact customer success. Like a lot of times we call those aha moments. And so that's one of the things, that Six Sigma is really focused on, is what are those aha moments? And then how do we actually standardize experiences to scale? And so that's, I think, why it really resonated with me. And I would say that, that when I first got involved in it, I don't know if I would have recognized that until I went through it. And then it's interesting because even if I'm not realizing that I'm using these concepts, I'm doing it all the time. It's like looking back at it, I'm like, oh yeah, I do that all the time. Or, oh yeah, that's just something we do as part of our quarterly planning or as part of our weekly, whatever. So I think that's also a really interesting part of it, is that it is applicable to a lot of other industries and whatnot as well. I've just found it particularly helpful for customer education and CX.
Okay. So Kelly, my brain is going in so many different directions based off of that, because for me, I'm trying to think, okay, I would guess a lot of people have heard the term Six Sigma. Most people probably think it's about throughput
Yeah.
in production, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get things through production, and that's by reducing error and reducing steps so
Yeah.
that I get more things out with that are not defective, and those
Yeah.
things get out faster, right?
Yeah.
And so but you said a couple of things there that made me think that maybe the application is broader than
Yeah.
just like getting things through production. It could also be like in the way you design a course, so that
100%.
the process of production that's going on in the learner's brain is helping them get to the conclusion faster and have less misconception.
Yeah.
Right. So
100%. Yeah.
so like help me understand that, because I think
Yeah.
maybe I came to this, or I would guess a lot of our folks who come to this are maybe thinking, so basically you're going to tell me how to make content faster.
Like faster. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like, but maybe that doesn't seem like that's the main point of this, or at least there's a lot
No,
more use cases besides that.
yeah. So I think if you look at, I'll kind of give you maybe a little bit of a high level of like 4 or 5 kind of points, where you might use it. And then we can definitely go kind of into detail. So, one example is that first of all, you want to cut through the noise to describe in one sentence what the problem is. So that sounds simple. Like why would you do that, right? So what that helps you do is it helps to cut that noise when you're prioritizing and there's lots of things coming in and you're just chasing every request. Because if you start by defining the problem with one sentence, which means what's happening, who does it affect, why does it matter? If I can't do that, then we're not ready for it to be a priority. So if I can't say in one sentence who it affects, why it matters, and if I can't get that into one sentence, then there's a need to look at data. And so this is like, we're not even talking content yet, right? We're just talking, there's a problem. let's figure out what the problem is. Like, just very broadly, there's a business problem, there's a customer problem. Let's see if there's an education root cause. So then you look at customer behavior, which in Six Sigma, they actually use that term VOC, which a lot of times we're using like voice of customer. So that's actually a Six Sigma terminology. And if you use that, if you simplify that concept, then think about it like this: like, customers vote with their clicks, they vote with their drop offs, they vote, with the data, because it shows a pattern. And where are they getting stuck? Which article or step drives the most confusion? Where do they drop off in kind of an onboarding journey? Like, because what we want to get to the meat of is where the real pain is, because that's when you're going to be able to actually say in one sentence what's happening, who it's affecting, and why it matters. And then from there, kind of the next step would be another kind of area would be, okay, now we have to find the bottlenecks. Now, some of those terms I was using, defects, non-value add activities, that's what those are. I mean, if you find the bottlenecks and you say, we all know this, that there's always like one step in a journey that causes the most friction. There's one thing, there's one bottleneck a lot of times. And so fixing that single step or that single issue, defect, or non-value add activity, a lot of times unblocks the biggest impact. And so there's no need to like rebuild an entire onboarding. There's no need to kind of go back to the drawing board, because once you've identified the actual issue, you find that bottleneck, and then you decide, okay, now that let's confirm that I'm solving the root cause. And that's where you say, okay, well, if a customer is not adopting, why aren't they adopting? They're not adopting because they are not engaging with training. Why aren't they engaging with training? Because because there's a lot of login issues, or there's an access issue. Why is there an access issue? There's an access issue because we have SSO problems. Why do we have SSO problems? Because of some kind of strange IDP setup. Aha, that's your root cause. So don't fix everything else. Fix that root cause. Fix the biggest thing that will cause the most improvement with the least amount of work, is kind of a good way to think about it. And so really what it does do is it creates a simple flow that helps make meaningful progress faster. So not content necessarily faster. I mean, that's also part of it, but just progress in general, being able to get to solving business outcomes faster, in the much larger sense of it. And then all the things kind of fit under that, including content development.
Okay, I'm taking notes, and so I'm going to see if I can come back to something here. And this may be completely wrong. And Kelly, we told you before the call, we'd like this to be a conversation. So
yeah.
One of my favorite books is this gentleman by the name of John Acuff. He wrote the book called Finished, and it's about setting goals and accomplishing goals. And he says one of the reasons why people don't finish their goals is a concept that he called noble distractions. So what it is it's a distraction, but it's not like I'm just not doing anything.
Yeah.
It's you're doing something that's noble, but it's not actually helping you get to your goal. Now, you said a word or a phrase, non-value activity.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the same thing where maybe you're directing your user into all these different feature sets, but it's not getting them to actually that first time to value, or the first thing that's going to help them realize that business outcome? What is a non-value activity? Is it close to this noble distraction?
Yeah.
That's the thing I thought of. So explain that a little bit more. I was interested in that concept.
Yeah, I think it can be, so in the strictest sense of it, it is that example of the widget that you colored blue that nobody wants blue. So in the simplest way, if you now translate that into a customer education or customer kind of experience solution, did the customer really need 4 ways to learn this information? No. They needed it in a just-in-time format within the product based on this, and this, because we've done our analysis, we know that then we only do that. So I do think that it's actually very much connected, and it very much helps you with those noble distractions, because once you have a good sense, like one of the concepts you use in Six Sigma is the Pareto principle, which is like the 80-20. That's the easiest way to say it, is like it's the 80-20 rule. We all know that. There's lots of like big fancy charts and lots of data, but like end of the day, it's 80-20, which means that, 20% of your content solves 80% of the problems, and vice versa. There's 20% of your customers cause 80%, let's say, of the noise and support. Like there's always this kind of 80-20 rule. And so what I like to think about is that if you are defining the root causes of an issue, and then you decide that this root cause, there might be 3, there might be 4, that we're going to start with this root cause, and then we're going to see how much better that process gets. And if it's up to our standard, which in manufacturing, it's Six Sigma. So if you want to know, that's where that comes from. It's a very specific, don't worry about it, stat about, defects per million opportunities. So like very, not necessarily related to us, but the concept is, because if we can get, if we can get to the point where 80% of the customers have exactly what they need, then you probably should move on to the next thing. You probably should move on, not necessarily to the next process, but because it can also be the next priority. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to think about them as just processes, think about them as priorities. And that way, when you do get these potentially noble distractions, things come up, you realize, there's another root cause, or, there's this, other potential issue. You can do the same kind of analysis and, determine what the root causes are, determine how big of an impact it would be if you fix this one thing. And then you can make a much more educated decision. Is this actually a really good distraction that what we're going to do is reprioritize and say, this is actually an official priority? Or do we just kindly give the data and give the information back, let's say, to the business or to whoever, to whoever you're working with, like cross-functionally, to say we can make a bigger impact if we focus on these other root causes or these other priorities.
Okay. So Kelly, I'm thinking about all these types of things that I either I've heard from other frameworks and other systems,
Yeah.
but then there's these other layers that I'm like, okay, well, how do you really do this? So let me give you an example. So in product management, there's the concept of a user story.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing that came to my mind is when you're like, you got to be able to articulate the problem in a clear sentence. And so like, what a product manager generally does is, as this type of user, I want to do this activity so that I can accomplish this goal. Right.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a Mad Lib, right? They have this very common
Yeah.
idea
Yeah.
for a user story of how they articulate the problem.
Yeah.
Is there is part of this framework, is there a way to articulate this idea of the root cause and how you would put it in a sentence? Is it that formulaic, or is it just like, you got to understand these 3 things, and if you could say these 3 things, you're good?
I think I go back to the, where are they stuck, or what is the thing, whatever, it's like the what, the when, and the why is probably right. It's the who, what, when, and why. Honestly, I think that's what it is. It's, can you articulate the common who, what, where, when, and why? Because if you can do that, then you're to the point where you're ready to solve an issue. If you can't, and actually it's actually interesting that you mentioned product, because another framework that I kind of coincidentally was working through, in the same couple of years as when I really got into Six Sigma, was the pragmatic framework. So it used to be called pragmatic marketing. It's basically product launch, like the product launch philosophy. And so there's actually a lot of I don't know if I'd say full overlaps, but there's a lot of concepts that actually fit very well together if you think of customer education or digital success as a product in its own. And so that's another layer that I oftentimes, I know I use all the time, is maybe that is a better way for you. If you don't have user stories, if you don't have users defined, then how are you going to know the who, right? If you don't, so it's actually very valid that, you should also treat in my opinion, you should treat customer education and digital success as a product in itself.
Okay.
100% agree, right, Todd?
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think the part, so that part is so important. One, like, at least in so many people think of customer education as this like program or an event, right? Where it's like, hey, there's this moment where this thing happens, and they don't think of it as a product. And a product, you have a different goal. A program is meant to be something that's transient. I'm not necessarily super invested in. Maybe I use it once or twice. But if you're thinking about it from a product perspective, hopefully it changes your interaction with it. So I think that's really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, for sure. I think you also, I mean, think about, if you think of it as a product, how much more likely are you to do enablement activities, to find promotional channels, to,
Mhm.
to do the things that otherwise, if you think of it as an event, that you're less likely to do because you're not, because then you're not thinking. It's like we always get stuck in Addy, right? Everybody, it's you always get stuck in the evaluation because you like do it and then you leave. So, but
Mhm.
if you think of it as a product, that's one of the things that you would do. Sorry, I dropped my AirPod. So as long as you can still hear me.
We can still hear you. Yes.
Okay. So if you treat it as a product, then you don't drop it, right? Because it's a product. You're going to keep, you need to know how that went. You need to understand the feedback. You need to do the debrief for the, to learn from it. So I do think it's important to think of it as a product.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and just so many benefits around that if you can position that with senior leadership so they
Yeah.
understand when you come back and say, hey, this is what I'm hearing from customer success. This is what I'm hearing
Yep.
from the voice of the customer. This is what we
Yeah.
need to do differently, right? You get that buy-in and they know
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a continuous thing. Kelly, let's get into, because I love concrete examples, like
Yeah.
getting into some specifics. Would it be possible for you to give us a little bit of background about
Sure.
where you're at as a customer education leader and maybe a problem that you're currently trying to solve for or have solved for using these principles, and maybe walk
Yeah.
us through and maybe some good results and some learnings, instead of saying bad
Yeah.
results, some learnings
Yeah.
that took place that, but help maybe people draw that in a little bit more concrete of how they might approach
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I can give you the example of the first project that I did, because I think that was a really good one. Because I'm relatively new in my role now. I've been with Point Click Care for about 2 months, and so all of these things are happening right now. So honestly, as I was kind of thinking back about this to kind of get prepared for the podcast, it was funny because I just kept thinking, oh good, we're doing this, oh good, we're doing this. And so right now I have so many examples that my brain is like, well, I mean, that's a lot. But I can tell you, my first the first one I did, I think, was always sticks out to me because it was like a defining moment. So I previously I got my green belt while I was working with LexisNexis on the legal and professional side of LexisNexis, and I was the program manager for education and consulting services. And there was a particular software product where adoption was suffering, churn was rising, as it does, and since anecdotally customers seem to they were churning because they didn't understand the power of the tool. We've all kind of experienced that, where we know, the types of feedback they were giving was, it doesn't do X, but it does, so we know that. So I did a root cause analysis because there was, like I said, anecdotally, it was education related. And so if we hadn't done this, if we had not used this kind of framework, what probably would have happened? Someone would have said, customers are turning because they don't understand the tool, create more training, and that would have been it, right? And I will tell you that if we would have done that, it would have done nothing, because when we started doing those whys, so that's one of the concepts in Six Sigma, is 5 whys. It's like the easiest one to remember if you're thinking about how do you dig into root cause. Like that's saying, like, why is this? Why is that? Why is that? So I looked at quantitative data, which is just, types of customers that are succeeding, the types that aren't, the types of education they've taken. So kind of gathering that. And then the qualitative data. So talking to the sales teams, reviewing surveys, getting that context of, matching up this with this. And what was interesting is that what I found was that a very low percentage of new customers, bought training services. And that was the primary method of training at that time. And so, and the ones who did buy training services retained. They were fine. There was nothing wrong with the people who did go through the training, that initial training. And so that was the first why, but that's not the root cause. That's really just the symptom. So, because you can't just say, aha, customers need to buy that you have to understand, well, why are customers not buying training? And so then the question becomes, why aren't they buying those, what we understand to be on our side of the fence, why these critical training onboarding services? And so found that there was two primary root causes. There were other causes, but again, we've got to pick, we can't fix all the things. We want to fix the things that we kind of want to do the 20% to hit the 80%. And so the current education packages weren't aligned with the price point of the software. So for smaller customers, their first year, it was more transactional business, lower ARR. And so it was blind. The services were not matched with, it didn't make sense. No matter what value proposition you'd have in place, the pricing of it didn't sound like it was a necessity for a customer. It looked more like it was an add-on. And then the other thing was that the process to actually scope and add the education to the contract was exhausting. I would not have done it as a salesperson. I would have just hoped that there wasn't going to be a clawback in my future, and just kind of sent them off. And so that's what was happening. And so instead of going and creating new training, or instead of editing the actual training, what we did is we chose those few improvements that were most likely to make the biggest improvement. So it was things like we created, the standard like silver, gold, platinum package. Silver being aligned with those, it was a reduced price, reduced scope, and it fit the needs of those smaller customers, which were the ones that were definitely much more likely not to purchase because because of that pricing misalignment. And then we also created value propositions. We treated it as a product. So we created value propositions, objection handling, did a sales enablement initiative, and really fixed the process for them to attach it. Because once we created packages, then it was no longer like, it didn't require an SOW, it didn't require the other things. Instead, it was much more transactional. The transactional nature of the services now matched the transactional nature of the software purchase. And so it did what we thought. I mean, it did what you would expect. It increased the attach rate for those smaller customers significantly, which then increased their adoption and made their adoption much more in line with the larger customers who were more likely to purchase the training services and went on their way and were retained. And so I thought the reason I think that feels like that was a really good experience for me, or kind of a turning point, was that I was able to see that I could take control of that narrative in a way, that if I hadn't asked those whys, and if I hadn't focused on the most important things, then we would have just created another set of training materials. And not only would that have not achieved the business goals, but we would have also added to our content release burden, right? So it was just like, yeah, so I think that was, and so now everything is kind of a flavor on that, right? Going forward, that's why I said it's hard for me to even pinpoint like one thing right now, because it's just, now that I understand that, it's all the time. That's just all the time. Every time, there's an ask, every time there's a consideration, every time there's a trend dip, we just go through that same, we go through that same process. And it's just part of our regular, just part of the regular planning of any project that we're doing, or any consideration.
Okay, Kelly. So maybe instead of trying to pick out a very specific example, there's something that I think if I were a person who has never tried to go through this exercise, the part that probably feels the most daunting to me is knowing how to make the right decisions when it comes to this whole idea of prioritizing.
Yeah.
So, and Six Sigma, I mean, the idea comes from like variance and standard deviation. So it's very data driven. It's very math oriented and statistical driven. And so like the idea here is I'm supposed to make decisions off of data. But how do you even approach that in the first place? Like, how do you know if you are weighing things properly and you're not just using your gut?
Yes. So I think that's a really important thing. And by the way, like I've worked for quite a few scaling up startups. The data is not always available. That's true in larger companies too. But think about, especially when you're in a company where data is few and far, it was kind of few and far between. I think that's a perfect example of a way that I've adapted the thinking to a more flexible framework, but still using the same concepts. So I might not be able to really easily get all of this data that I need, but I can figure out what I can get. And then I can figure out what I can do from a qualitative perspective to, what I would say, like, enhance the viability of it. So could I get some data, and it kind of leads me to think, that a particular vertical seems to be struggling in a particular way, or a certain, and then do I vet that? Do I talk to the support leadership? Do I talk to the customer support or the customer success leadership and say, so this is what we're seeing. Is that what your customers are telling you? What else? What do we have? What are your, Gong analysis, AI, analysis is showing you? What are your, what's your AI? What all the, AI is great for this stuff, by the way. Like, by the way, AI with Six Sigma is like amazing, because there's so many things that you want to do, but there's so many things that you couldn't do that now we can do. But when you do that, I think that's I think that's just a really good example of how you would make that decision without lots of data. You get what you can, you make your best guess, but you accept that it's not perfect. Because one of the things, actually, like, I would say is also part of Six Sigma is the idea of continuous improvement as well.
Yeah.
So not following, we always, the ADDIE model, there's so much debate, I feel like, about that, but the concept of not taking that so literally and spreading it out over a long amount of time, the same thing applies in Six Sigma, in my opinion, in terms of the simplification of Six Sigma in our world. We would not want something to take 6 months, so we're going to get the data we can get. Like, time, it's like, give yourself time bound.
Yeah.
Like, make it time bound. I'm going to get what I can get in the next 2 weeks, and that's what we're going to use to make a decision. And it's not the end of the world, because if we pick the wrong thing, we're going to be measuring, we're going to be doing what we can to see if it's working. And if it's not, be ready to pivot. Don't get too caught up in not having exact data. I think it really does need to be a combination of data, contextual information, and then some gut. I mean, I think that's just the nature of it.
I mean, you can't take the human out of it, right?
Yeah.
I love this concept that I think it was Doug Norton taught me. He's head of customer success. He used to be at Bill.com. I can't remember where he's at now, but he talked this about one-way doors and two-way doors. And so he's like, a one-way door where you're going out there, so you're making a big change in your technology. Like, this is going to affect everybody. That's a one-way door, and you should take 6 months to a year to really analyze this, because there's no going back, right? Or if you are going to go back, it's going to be like 2 years later that you're going to go back and make a change. And then there's the two-way doors where it's like, hey, I got the data. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go test this, because it's a smaller change, right? And so I think weighing that in there with what you're talking about, fantastic. Yeah. I love the example, Kelly. That was so concrete of a great example that everyone can take and use with this in retention and product usage. When you delivered these findings, who did you deliver it to? Did you have pushback? If you had pushback, how did you address that? Because what you went through, that was money. I hope everybody listened to that part, because that was phenomenal, getting to the whys. So what did you do? Because I wish it all worked that way, where you're like, hey, I did my findings and here's what it is. And everybody's like, yay, Kelly saved the day. It's usually never that way.
That's not what happens all the time in my
life. Right. We have emotional beings that we work with, and they have their opinions, and they don't go do the homework that often that you and others have done. So what was the feedback that you got? Who did you meet with? And then how did you resolve any concerns that were there?
It's a great question. And I think this is true no matter what the situation is. First of all, keeping your stakeholders, making sure that the business outcome is clear from the get-go, because you need to have a shared business outcome, not just an activity or not just a task or not just, what's the outcome we want to achieve. That way you can always point back to that when you're able, so that whenever you're coming back with findings, it's like, we found this, which will business outcome, insert business outcome. And keeping the stakeholders, so first of all, understanding that shared business outcome, but then also keeping the stakeholders updated with what you're finding, and being flexible with, they say that's just not true, let me give you some more information. Like, being okay with, with that, because your data is not going to be perfect. I mean, I've never worked in a company where my data is even like close to perfect, right? I mean, that's just the nature of business. But so I think being flexible is another part of it. And I remember that I did put together for that in particular, because it was part of my big project, right? I put together like a more formal communications plan, which was more around, like I ran it more like a true project, right? Because that was part of that kind of learning my muscles of this. And so it was definitely, the stakeholders from each of the most impacted, areas. So like sales leadership, training, leadership. So it was those team members. And the updates were, we've gotten some information. We believe this. We believe if, does that sound right to you? So that gut check of not going through the whole ADDIE process, if we kind of layer that, and not going through the whole ADDIE process and building the thing that didn't solve the problem. So checking in the stakeholder to say, here's where we are, here's what you think, let's gut check that. Then coming back with, here's the root causes, and we think this is the biggest one. Again, does that sound right to you? Because a lot of times you will hear something that you otherwise would not have not been able to factor in. And so that's kind of that's another important part of it. And then adjusting. If they say not quite, I think, because like something you might learn might be, yes, this is a root cause, but let's layer on this strategic, this other kind of additional strategic initiative like that the company is having, or like if there's something else that you need to consider that you wouldn't necessarily have taken into your analysis, be ready to do that. So I think that's the other part, because that helps get their buy-in, because if they're able to say, I appreciate that, or I don't appreciate that, and here's kind of an additional layer, then you can better work with them to go through the project. And so that was a more formalized. So, I mean, I was updating, and when you did give feedback, it was definitely flexible, and making sure that each stage that people were being updated on, what the original outcomes were, what the initiative looks like, what the progress is, and then what the actual success metrics are, and what the progress is. Now, I would say that an evolution of that is that now, because that was a more formalized project, but the way that I do that now is in what I've started referring to as a learning council. I think I've always done it, but I just didn't really recognize it as that. So as part of our quarterly planning process, I think of it as like a pre-planning. We talk to all of the most important stakeholders across the business that are most likely to be impacted by customer education. So customer success, customer support, implementation, those teams. And we get their data, what's the ticket deflection rate, what are people asking about in the help, center. We ask customer success where they're, what products are, they're focusing on for, because of maybe market changes, product in terms of, what features are underutilized and why. And so if you think about those as the inputs, like my input before would have been, this product it has poor churn, and we think it has something to do with education, because people say, they don't know how to use it. So we get all those inputs, and then we see what data we can get, because again, it's not going to be perfect, but what do you have, right? If you have Gainsight or you Salesforce, or, you've got something. If you have, if you're using, any of the tools, you've got something you can get to help inform, these trends in what the customer needs. And then you take that, and it doesn't have to be project by project. You just take that, you ingest it, you plan with the team to say, okay, well, these are the things we are going to focus on, and then communicate that back out to your stakeholders to say, all right, well, thanks everybody for all of your input. Here's kind of the overview. Here's where we'll be focusing. These are the things we won't be focusing on. These are the things that we may revisit, let's say next quarter. And then a reminder of what those shared business outcomes were going to be, and what the success metrics will be, because then you can give them an update pretty easily once a month, and then do an update at the end of the quarter to say, here's where we've gotten. Do we feel like we've achieved that 80-20? Do we feel like we have have with this root cause or whatever, with this initiative? Do we feel like we moved the needle enough? And so I think that's what it should become, is, in my opinion, is more of just a natural kind of part of your quarterly planning, as opposed to it being like project by project by project by project.
All right, Kelly. So we're getting near time. I thought about something that I think is going to be a big takeaway for me. A lot of times I tend to, I think it's easy to get emotionally invested in something that you want to do. And one of the big takeaways from everything that you've talked about so far today, for me at least, has been the fact that, like, the question oftentimes we ask ourselves is, should the change, or should the thing I do to try to impact the goal, should it be like a marginal iteration, or should it be this massive transformation? Do I tinker with what I'm currently doing, or do I throw it out and get something better because the old car stinks and it's not going to get me where I want to go? But what I like about this framework and the way you presented it and the way you're talking about it is, oftentimes we get so mired down into like what our appetite and what our emotional resilience is about, like iterate or transform.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying, instead, tell me if this is fair. It seems like the goal here is to say, no, you shouldn't be asking, do I do something transformative or do I do something iterative? You should be asking, what is the cheapest, fastest, best way to get to the outcome?
Yeah, agreed. You start with the outcome instead of start with the do I want to do this or this? Yeah, right. Instead start with the outcome, because then it'll be much more obvious if you start with the outcome, which is the better option. Because, I think the best way to think about it is, think about how many people were creating short shelf life content with very difficult to utilize tools. I feel like there was definitely a period of time where that was very common, to do very heavy workflow, heavy scenario, heavy whatever based. And realistically it had to get updated so regularly. I think that's like the perfect example of that, where if you had started with the outcome for something, for a project like that, and the outcome was, realistically, we have to be able to get, the customer to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And we're in an agile environment, so it needs to be kept up to date on biweekly release cadences. You would have never created the big thing. You wouldn't have done this big, massive transformation, or in this case, this big, massive kind of, project or course, because that wouldn't have achieved the outcome in the cheapest, fastest, best way. And I think that it also, I think the other key part to me of having this kind of a framework is that you make more space for innovation. You make more space for creativity. You make more space for those transformative things, because you're only focusing on the things that are the most important. So to me, I think that it ends up making more room for things that are much more interesting, and that people are much more dedicated to, because it's you end up doing much less low impact work and you do a lot more high impact work.
Kelly, I'm sold, and I know that I'm at a first sigma. I'm not even close to a Six Sigma. I'm like, oh my gosh,
there was a white belt or a yellow belt.
I don't even have a belt.
He's like a clear belt.
I'm like holding my trousers up with my hands. That's how bad it is, Todd.
You got a rope, yeah.
I got a rope. As I heard through that, I was like, oh, there's so many. You know what I know something is true is when it's so simple but so profound. Just so simple but so profound. And that's what you've done today, Kelly, is so great. Thank you so much for helping myself and our guests. That's why it's called SaaS Therapy. It's an actual therapy session. So thank you so much. Kelly, we always like our guests to give a piece of homework. So if you could assign one piece of homework to our audience, because that's what a therapy session is about. You go in there, you kind of express what's going on, and then the doctor's like, hey, this is what I think we should work on this week. Yeah. Kelly, what would that be? What would be the takeaway that you give to everyone?
I would suggest that you use your AI tool of choice, Copilot, whatever, and plug in a little bit about a project that you have right now, or a situation, a gap, or something that you're kind of struggling to get to the cause of, or you're struggling to know if you should be transformative or easy. And ask to apply Six Sigma philosophy to it, and give you some ideas, because I think like to your point, it it could be complicated, but could also be very simple. And I think that AI, to me, that's actually one of the a great application of it, is using some, taking a really big framework and then saying, simplify this and apply it to this particular situation. And then you can start small. You can use some concepts to, in that one project.
Oh, so good. Kelly, thanks so much for joining us today. If our guests want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Look her up on LinkedIn, everybody. Awesome. Kelly, you've been great. Thank you so much for joining us today. If it's your first time here, follow us. We release these episodes every week on Wednesday. And we hope that you come back and join us along this therapy journey that Casey and I are on. Maybe one day we'll graduate and get out of therapy. Maybe not. I don't know. We got a lot of problems. We'll figure it out.
We got a lot of problems.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Kelly.
Thank you.
SaaS Therapy is brought to you by Brainstorm, the SaaS platform for SaaS adoption. Learn more at brainstorminc.com.